Welcome back to our Sunday School series on the book of Judges. This is the final lesson, lesson number 10 in our series, as we look at chapters 19 through 21 and the moral chaos in Israel, the Levite, and the tribe of Benjamin. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. We got 3 chapters to go through today, but this is the end of Judges. So we've made it to the bitter end. A little bit of review here, just by way of the outline of the book of Judges. When we first opened the book of Judges, we took a look at the prologue, which was the first two chapters of the book, which introduced us to the failure of the conquest of the Promised Land, and then introduced us to what we now know as the cycle of the Judges. After the prologue, we actually enter into the cycle of the Judges, which takes us from chapter 3 to chapter 16, and we have 12 judges there, 7 major judges, 12 total. And then the last part of the book, where we were last week and where we'll finish today, is the epilogue. And the epilogue is broken up into 2 primary sections. The first section, which we looked at last week, was about religious chaos in Israel. And then today, where we are, is we're going to see that not only is there religious chaos, but there's moral chaos in Israel. And when we looked at the religious chaos in Israel, this was the story about Micah and the Levite. So basically anybody was doing whatever they wanted religiously, not paying attention to the covenant, not paying attention to the priesthood, not paying attention to the commands. It was all everyone doing what was right in their own eyes. So now we're going to end today on this note of moral chaos. And we'll take a look here. Again, one of the primary figures in this section is a Levite, a religious leader in Israel, which emphasizes the depravity to which the nation has fallen. So let's turn to chapter 19. And as we read along, we'll make observations and comments. Judges 19, verse 1. In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Now here we start the chapter with this phrase, in those days when there was no king in Israel. Now that tells us a couple things, which we've already mentioned before. Number one, it tells us when this was written. It was when there was a king in Israel, looking back to when there was no king in Israel. The other thing that it emphasizes is because there's no king in Israel, everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes, right? And so there's this underlying thrust to the entire book of Judges that there needs to be a king in Israel to provide godly leadership and order for the nation. And that's not the case during the time of the Judges. So this Levite is sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim and takes to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Verse 2, and his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah and was there some 4 months. Now let me plant a seed here as we move forward in this narrative. It says that the concubine was unfaithful to him. That could mean one of 2 things. It could mean that she had an affair or was adulterous in some way. But we don't see that explicitly mentioned in the story. What we see is that she abandons the Levite and leaves him. Now there's going to be a reason for that, as we'll see later in the story, why she might do that. All right, so she goes back home to Bethlehem in Judah for 4 months. Verse 3. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple of donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. And his father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the fourth day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Strengthen your heart with a morsel of bread, and after that you may go." So the two of them sat and ate and drank together. And the girl's father said to the man, "Be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him till he spent the night there again. And on the fifth day he arose early in the morning to depart. And the girl's father said, "Strengthen your heart and wait until the day declines." So they ate, both of them. And when the man and his concubine and his servant rose up to depart, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has waned toward evening. Please spend the night. Behold, the day draws to its close. Lodge here and let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall arise early in the morning for your journey and go home." But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Jebus, that is, Jerusalem. He had with him a couple of saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." And his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah." One little note here. At this time of this story, Jerusalem is still under the leadership or rule of the Jebusites. So this tells us that this story is not chronologically in order with the book. The book's not going, this happened in January, this happened in February, this happened in March. But it's arranged thematically. And you remember the theme of the book is this downward spiral into darkness. This is going to be the darkest of all the stories we've read, so it's last, right? It's down at the bottom of the spiral. So this is early on in the conquest, or just after the conquest, right? The Israelites have not gone into Jebus to drive out the inhabitants there. So they're not going to stay there because we're not staying with the foreigners. God forbid that we do that. Those people are animals. We're not going to stay there. All right, so they decide, in verse 13, he says to his young man, "Come and let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah." So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Now look at the back of your map here. You can find Jerusalem. Just to the north of Jerusalem, you see Ramah. That's one of the cities that he mentions. And just between Jerusalem and Ramah is Gibeah. Now, whose hometown is Gibeah of Benjamin? Anybody know? Saul. King Saul. Okay. King Saul, his hometown is Gibeah of Benjamin. Now, what tribe is Jerusalem a part of? Judah. So this is just across the border from Judah into Benjamin. All right. Now, surely the Benjamites will be more hospitable than the foreigners in Jebus, right? That's why they're not going there. We'll go to our own people, and they'll be more hospitable. That's why we'll move on to that place. So they come into the village. They stay in the square for a period of time because nobody invites them into their house. And in verse 16, "Behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were Benjamites, or Benjaminites, right? He doesn't need to say that. We already know Gibeah is in Benjamin. Now, what's the point? The author's emphasizing who these people are because of what's about to happen. All right? These are Benjaminites, your fellow Israelites. These aren't the Jebusites that they go in to stay with. Now, notice that the one who provides some hospitality to them is an Ephraimite who is just like the Levites. If you look back at the beginning of chapter 19, the Levite was from the hill country of Ephraim, just like this guy is. So he finds a fellow Ephraimite. And it's not the Benjaminites who give quarter to the Levite and his cohort there, but this foreigner in Benjamin. In verse 17, and he lifted up his eyes, that's the Ephraimite, lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and your female servant, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything." The old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. That's great hospitality, right? They washed their feet and gave them food to eat and drink. Not just him, but his servant and their donkeys and everyone in their party. Now here's where it turns real dark. This next verse, starting in verse 22, is going to take us back to another story in Scripture. And it's from Genesis 19, Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so let's start looking at what happens next. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, surrounded the house, beating on the door. And they said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her master was, until it was light. I want to pause here because what we see here, this is utter depravity, in my opinion. When we talk about the theological term total depravity, right? Every aspect of who we are is touched by sin. Utter depravity is we're down as far down as you can go as far as sin is concerned. And it's not the folks of Sodom and Gomorrah who are the evil ones here. It's Israel. The Israelites are replaying Sodom and Gomorrah. And we see this utter depravity happen to three parties here. The Benjaminites first. And the Benjaminites are described as first worthless fellows. Now we've seen this similar phraseology used before. Do you remember where else we've seen this in Judges? Worthless fellows were gathered. Gideon was one, right? And then the other one was Abimelech, Gideon's son, who makes himself king, right? And he gathers these worthless fellows around him. So here, these worthless fellows are from Benjamin. And the Benjaminites are Sodomites. All right? In both the literal and figurative sense of the word, right? Depravity upon depravity for the Benjaminites. Now, not only are the Benjaminites utterly depraved, but the Ephraimite who invites the Levite into his house, this dude is utterly depraved. Because for some reason, he thinks it's a good idea to give his daughter and the concubine to these guys. Now, that's also a replay of Sodom and Gomorrah, too, right? But at first you think, oh, this guy's pretty good. He welcomes them in their house and he provides some hospitality for them. So maybe he's all right. But man, he is depraved because he's going to give his daughter over to these worthless fellows here. And he actually uses these terms. In verse 24 he says, ravish. Does anybody else have a different term than this? Basically it's rape. Yeah, he says, here you go, you can rape my daughter. Man, talk about depraved here. This is real dark. And then he says also in verse 24, he uses this phraseology. He says, you can can do whatever you wish to them. Now that's basically the catchphrase. Everybody does what was right in their own eyes. And basically that's what he's saying here. Here you go, here's my daughter, do whatever is right in your own eyes with her. And so not only the Benjamites are utterly depraved, but this Ephraimite is. Now it's not only these two, but the Levite is the worst of them all. So let's finish out the story here. So the Benjaminites rape this woman until she can barely survive. Verse 27, her master, that's the Levite, rose up in the morning. All right, now you should stop there. That means he went to sleep the night before. He gave this woman to them, his wife, and then he went to bed and slept the whole night. So he wakes up in the morning, opens the door of the house to go on his way. He's not even going to go and look for her. He's not concerned about her well-being. He doesn't give one care about what happens to his wife. And this guy is callous in the most depraved sense of the word. He rises up in the morning after a good night's rest and goes out to go on his way. And as he walks out, behold, there's his concubine lying at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. Now, the reason her hands are on the threshold is probably because she's been hitting on the door trying to get somebody to come help her. And he's sleeping over in the house here. And he said to her, "Get up, let's go." Now talk about a good guy, right? Man. Let's get up, let's go. I'm ready to go. But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose up and went away to his home. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." Now, where it says all who saw it, it could be referring to both what happened in Benjamin and Gibeah with the men raping her, and also what happens to her when the Levite dismembers her and sends her all over the nation of Israel. But this shows you also how particularly depraved this guy is. She may not have been dead at this point. It doesn't say that she's dead. It just says that she's laying at the door of the house. And when he comes out, he says, "Get up, let's go." And when she can't answer because she's been assaulted all night long, picks her up, throws her on her donkey, and then he goes and dismembers her. She may have been still alive at that point. It's not clear whether that's the case. But you can see from verse 20 or verse 30 how shocking it is to the people who hear about it. Now, this is Israel. This is where Israel is during the time of the judges. This is how deep and dark the sin is. Now, we'll see in a second that there are some time markers that show us kind of where this story is happening as far as history is concerned. And it's not long after the conquest happens. It's not like this has been hundreds of years for them to dive way down deep into this darkness. It's relatively quickly after they come into the promised land that it's this dark in Israel. So that's chapter 19. Now Israel is Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's move on and see what happens in chapter 20. Well, before we go there, any questions or thoughts about chapter 19? It makes your heart sink just to consider that this is even a reality, that this happens all the time. This guy's he's probably a psychopath and because of what he does here and his callousness. All right, so what does this lead to then? So the Levite dismembers his wife and sends her all over Israel. Verse 1 of chapter 20. Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. Now, take a look at your map first to get what they're saying. This is a merism. A merism, as we use it in English, everything from A to Z. Well, everyone from Dan to Beersheba. Here's Dan all the way up at the north. Beersheba is all the way down here at the south. Gilead is all the way over here in the east. All right? Everyone from Alaska to Key West came out. Right? That's what we're saying, right? Everyone came out. Now, wonder of wonders, they come out as one man. That hasn't happened at all in the entire book of Judges. They've all been pitted against each other in civil war and strife, and they've tried to get people to come together as one. Well, here finally, this is what it takes for them to come together as one. But in fact, they're not completely together as one, because one of the tribes themselves is responsible for this heinous crime. So everybody comes out as one. Verse 2. The chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this evil happen?" And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, now notice it says the husband of the woman who was murdered. It doesn't say whether she was murdered by the Benjaminites or by him. It just says that she was murdered. So she was murdered, and he answered and said, "I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead." Notice he doesn't say why they violated the concubine, because, I threw my concubine out to him and said, do whatever you want with her. So he's not holding himself accountable for what he's done. They violated my concubine, and she is dead. Well, that may be because I just killed her, right? He doesn't make it clear. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. Then all the people arose as one man, saying, "None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people that when they come up they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel." So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. Now let's pause again for a second here. This Levite, he is manipulative. That's part of why he's probably a psychopath, right? He's taken all the focus away from himself and put on everybody else and all the bad things that they're doing, and he's now garnered everybody up to go to war against Benjamin. So this guy, this dude is evil as much as you can consider somebody being evil. He's manipulative, callous, a murderer, and so on and so forth.
And it was all done to him.
Right, exactly. And he didn't have anything to do with any of it either. It was all those other guys. All right, verse 12. The tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there are two phrases being used for these two groups back and forth. The people of Israel, or the sons of Israel, and the people of Benjamin, or the sons of Benjamin. Why is that being used? Benjamin's part of the people of Israel. Benjamin's part of the sons of Israel. But now there's this huge divide that has happened, where the Israelites no longer are considering the Benjaminites part of their own people because of the heinous evil that has happened. So there's this language being used to create this great divide here. Now in Gibeah, verse 16, there were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Every one could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Now this is a really interesting verse, and we've mentioned it before, but a couple of things to take note of here. Number one is, we've already met a left-handed man from Benjamin in Judges. Do you remember who it was? Ehud, all right, the judge. He was a left-handed man from Benjamin. What that term means, if you remember, is it means basically he's got one hand tied behind his back. He's a really good warrior, highly trained and skilled warrior from Benjamin. And we see here that he wasn't the only one. There are 700 chosen men like that in Benjamin. This is their special ops unit for this tribe. And it says that they were so good that they could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And literally what it says, they could sling a stone at a hair and not sin. So this helps us understand what sin is. If you can sling a stone at a hair and not sin or not miss, that means if you are sinning, it means you're missing the mark. All right? If you are sinning, then you're missing the mark. So that term actually even comes over into archery later on. If you sin, you're missing the mark as an archer. So here we see, we get some insight onto this Hebrew word sin as we talk about slinging a stone at a hair and not missing. So really, Benjamin has some really valiant warriors here. Verse 17. The men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. The people of Israel rose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. In Numbers, whenever Israel picks up and moves and marches out to a new location, who leads the way? Judah. All right, so Judah always is going first. In Judges chapter 1, we have also the same, it's actually verses 1 and 2, so at the very beginning of the book, they're talking about the continued conquest of the land, and they ask the same question, who should go up first? And the answer is Judah's going to go up first. So Judah has the precedence, the preeminence of going first, but also the crime happened to a woman of Judah, right? She's from Bethlehem of Judah. So they have a particular interest in executing justice against Benjamin as they have committed this crime against one of their own clan members, tribe members. So Judah goes up first. Verse 19, and the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. And the people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until the evening, and they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, go up against them. Now what we see happen here is they get destroyed, the people of Israel, they get destroyed, and then they repent. Why do they repent after they get destroyed? The reason is because they're here. So God is punishing them in this incident as well. God is coming out as a judge against not only the Benjaminites, but against the rest of the people of Israel. And they recognize that that is the case. They have sinned against God. And so they come to God recognizing that this judgment has come upon them, and they repent. And it doesn't just happen once, it happens more than once. The Lord tells them to go up against Benjamin again in verse 24. So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin in the second day. And Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. And these were men who drew the sword. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. Right, he didn't make that promise before. He just told them, go up. And this is your punishment for your depravity against me. All right. Now notice there's an important editorial remark here that the author makes. The Ark of the Covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days. Now, if you remember from last lesson, the Levite that was violating all the religious laws, Who was he? His name was Jonathan, the grandson of Moses. Okay? Now here we have Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron. So is this very far removed after the conquest? No. This is basically one generation into the promised land that has happened here. So the last story that we looked at in 17 and 18, and then this story today, they're not chronologically in order after Samson, but they're particularly depraved stories that have happened during the time of the judges. So they're arranged in this descending order of depravity. So we're not far removed from the Israelites entering into the promised land. Verse 28, God tells them to go up to war and that he's going to give the Benjaminites into their hand. Now we're going to see a replay of another Old Testament story happen here. This time not against the Canaanites, but against the Israelites. And the story comes from Joshua chapter 8, where Joshua is told to go and destroy Ai. Joshua chapter 8. What happens here is the exact same thing that happens to the Canaanites who lived in Ai. So let's see what happens to now the Israelites here. So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah, and the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day and set themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And the people of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city. And as at other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country, about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, "They are routed before us as at the first." But the people of Israel said, "Let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways." And all the men of Israel rose up out of their places and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Ma'areh Gebah. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel. And the battle was hard. But the Benjaminites did not know that disaster was close upon them. And the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel. And the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. So the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, "Surely they are defeated before us as in the first battle." But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and behold, the whole of the city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them. And those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst, surrounding the Benjaminites. They pursued them and trod them down from Noah as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor. And they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down in the highways, and they were pursued hard to Gidom, and 2,000 men of them were struck down. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin, and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men, and beasts, and all that they found. And all the towns that they found, they set on fire. All right, this is what Joshua did to Ai in the conquest. All right? Complete annihilation and wiping out the entire people. But now it's the Israelites one against another here that happens. So at the end here, we only have a few hundred Benjaminites left. And so now we have a purging of the evil from the promised land, but it's not the Canaanites that are being purged, it's the Israelites that are being purged out of the land. So this is the exact same thing as I mentioned in Joshua chapter 8, where what happens is the battle takes place, the Benjaminites come out of the city to attack Israel, as they're battling, there's an ambush set. They go into the city because now it's no longer defended by those who are in the battle, and they start to raze the city, burn it, kill everybody inside of it. So the Benjaminites, as they're in battle, they turn back and they see the city's on fire. There's smoke rising up in the sky. And they realize they're surrounded, the city's destroyed, and so they try to flee, but the majority of them are struck down by the Israelites at this point. Now, there's some discussion about, were they supposed to go that far? The people of Israel, were they supposed to go that far in the battle against Benjamin to basically annihilate the entire tribe? Because God doesn't tell them to do that specifically. He doesn't say, go and wipe out the entire tribe. He says, I'm going to give them into your hand. But it's possible that because Israel has already been punished before for their depravity, that they're taking it too far in the battle by killing so many people. Questions about chapter 20. This is really dark mess. Questions about chapter 20. All right. So Benjamin's almost wiped out now. Now, verse 21, or chapter 21, excuse me, I want you to see this structure happen. We talk about in Hebrew before a chiasm. A chiasm is a literary structure that is used throughout Scripture and other ancient writings. And it goes like this. This is how it works in this passage. The first part of the narrative, we have a rape of the concubine. The second part of the narrative is the holy war against Benjamin. And then the third part is the problem. And the problem is the oath that the Israelites make when they all come together. All right, we'll find out more specifically what that is. But what's going to happen then is things are going to reverse. This is B prime, and here's A prime here. And now we're going to see a second holy war. And we'll see who that's against in a second. And then we're going to see a second rape that takes place here. So you see how this structure is set out? This is called a chiasm. The most important part of a chiasm is usually the middle part. Here's the problem, and all of these things lead up to the problem, and then these things result from this problem, at least in this particular context. So we've already seen the first part, and we're getting to the middle of the chiasm, and then we're going to reverse back out of it in chapter 21. All right, chapter 21, verse 1. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, none of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. All right, there's the problem. None of us shall give our daughters to marriage in Benjamin. All right, there's the issue. Verse 2, the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be one tribe lacking in Israel? And the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people of Israel said, which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. All right? They got a problem here with some rash vows, right? They're just throwing out this oath and this thing and that thing before the Lord as they all came up to go out against Benjamin at this big gathering. Not only did they make the oath not to give their daughters, but they've given an oath that whoever didn't come up with us as one man, they're going to be put to death. So in verse 6, the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin, their brother. Oh, how sweet of them at this point. They said, one tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left? Since we have sworn by Yahweh that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives. So now they're going to try to circumvent the oath that they have made. Verse 8, and they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? And behold, no one had come up from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So if you look on your map, you can see that Jabesh Gilead is probably located here in the land of Gilead. This is Manasseh and Gad, those two tribes. Most often Gilead refers to the tribe of Manasseh. So Jabesh Gilead is here. Nobody from that clan came up to this big gathering where they're all united as one. In verse 10, so the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword. Also the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. That is a very specific phrase that is used by God for the people in the promised land that the Israelites are supposed to wipe out and get rid of from the promised land when they enter in. Now it's being used by the Israelites of their own people, that they're to be devoted to destruction. So here again we see this lends credence to the idea that they have overdone it with Benjamin, because now they're going to go and overdo it against Jabesh Gilead here. Verse 12. They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead. But they were not enough for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So here we are. We've seen this holy war against Jabesh Gilead. And now we're beginning to see the second rape occur. There are two groups actually here. The first is the daughters of Jabesh Gilead, who against their consent are given in marriage to the Benjaminites. Notice this. There's an interesting word that's used here in verse 15. When it says the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. This word is used in Genesis chapter 10 when you have the table of the nations. And it lists this genealogy. There's a specific man named Perez. And it says the earth was divided in his days. And that's most likely referring to the Tower of Babel. Right? So when Perez was alive, his name actually means divided. The earth was divided in his days because that's when God scattered everybody across all the earth. Now that word is being used of what's happening here. They are divided. There's been a breach in the tribes of Israel. That's the word Perez. So now there has been the same idea of the Tower of Babel, everybody being scattered apart from one another. The same thing has happened here in Israel. In verse 16... Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? Why are the women destroyed out of Benjamin? You did it. That's why there aren't any women there, okay? So again, they're like trying to not point the finger at themselves. They're the ones that have caused this problem in the first place. Verse 17, they said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanon. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers and their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle. Neither did you give to them, else you would now be guilty. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And that's the end of the book. All right, now this is where we see the second group of women who are raped here. They're kidnapped and forced into marriage and raped. So this ends the chiasm. So what a great way to end the book here. To illustrate how deep Israel has gone into their depravity. So as we come to this end, what's the point? What's the point, right? We've gone down deep into this dark spiral, and the author has done this is a beautifully written book. The outline of the book is very simple, but perfectly constructed to get across the point. The problem is there's no king in Israel, and everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. Now, from this story, chapter 19, 20, and 21, where don't you want your king to come from? You don't want your king to come from Benjamin. Who's the king that comes from Benjamin? Saul. So where do you want your king to come from? Judah. You want the king to come from Judah. Well, obviously that's David. But even David is going to fail. So where is the king from Judah going to come from? He's going to come in the little baby born in the manger. It's going to be Jesus. And so this illustrates, this is the best way to understand Judges as we end here. This is where we are without Christ. This is where we are without our king. We're right here alongside the Benjaminites, engaged in this deep, dark depravity. That's where we all are without Jesus. And so that's the gospel in Judges, is it's this thrust towards the king. We need this king to give us righteousness, to pull us out of darkness, and to set up this kingdom. And so the author does it perfectly by taking us into the deep darkness with these folks here.
Congratulations, you've made it through all of our lessons in the Sunday School series on the book of Judges. This has been lesson number 10 on the moral chaos in Israel, chapters 19 through 21, the Levite, and the tribe of Benjamin.